On today's Locked On Jayhawks, we take an early look at the KU basketball roster for 2023-2024. What are going to be some of the offseason additions, subtractions, some of the big moves, some of the up-in-the-air moves, all that here on Locked On Jayhawks.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Jayhawks. I'm Derek Johnson. Thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get any of your podcasts. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we're going to be taking a look at the roster right now and into the offseason for KU, what to maybe expect, what are going to be some of the biggest question marks or some of the biggest decisions looming one way or another for KU, and how good could this team possibly be in 2023 to 2024. As far as our view of it right now, before they really get into the thick of things and maybe start adding guys or having guys subtract. Obviously, there was the news yesterday of Cam Martin transferring out of the program. But first, this episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On to get started today. Let's start with an early look of the roster. So who is back for sure? Dajuan Harris is going to be back, and he is going to be your veteran point guard leading the way. As far as what that looks like, I don't know. Does it look like just another version of what he did this year, around 9 points per game, really good facilitator, good defense, get some steals? Is it the same, or is it more? Does he start scoring more? Does he start getting 11, 12 points per game? That'll be the big question there. KJ Adams will be back next year. There's another question mark about what will that look like. Does KJ's game grow to where he is constantly trusted to do a lot of what Jalen did in terms of being a driver, right? We saw KJ be really good at driving to the rim and be able to do that. Does he switch to being a four-man where he's more of a, kind of wing perimeter type player where he works on his outside shot and his dribbling and his ability further to drive? Or does he settle in as a five moving forward where he starts working on some of his post moves down low? This is the ultimate fork in the road offseason, I think, for KJ, between which of those two he is going to be and which of those two KU wants him to be moving forward. But you have him back and you feel comfortable because he is another pillar that will be starter coming back for you. Ernest Uday, feel comfortable saying that I assume he's going to be coming back at this point. And again, what is his role? Is he going to be a starter? Are you going to play KJ at the 4? Ernest starts at the 5 and have a bunch of rim protection and size down low? Or is Ernest going to be coming off the bench? And maybe we see some lineups where KJ is next to Ernest, but maybe, if KJ plays 28 minutes per game next year, maybe 8 of them are at the 4, maybe 20 of them are at the center, and then Ernest is giving you 15 minutes at the center, maybe you have another 5 minutes of a third center that you would throw out there. But that all depends on his development. Now, I'm very high on what Ernest Uday could be at Kansas. I don't know if that'll be next year or in 2 years. Maybe he takes the step to being a good player next year and then a great player like an All-American in 2 years. But regardless, it's nice to have him back, and I expect big growth from him. I also expect Zuby Ejiofor to be back at this point in time. Now, I guess there could be a case that, if you're behind Ernest Uday and KJ is still a center right now, like maybe I go somewhere else. But I think we saw Zuby before he had the rolled ankle against Kentucky was ahead of Ernest Uday. So you give it another offseason, see where you're at and see where things shake out. If KJ does move to the 4, then even if you are the backup center to Ernest, you're still going to be playing a good amount of minutes. So I kind of expect him back as well, and improvement there also. Players who are gone. Kevin McCullar is going to be gone. He did a senior day speech. Even though he could have another year of play, he's going to go and probably be like a second-round draft pick into the NBA because of his defense and his versatility. Jalen Wilson, he's gone. He did a senior day speech. I know, yes, I think he could actually have 2 more years even if he really wanted to. But he's going to be gone. He's going to be like a second-round pick because of his driving ability to score, and ability to kind of play up and down the lineup, the 3 through 5 positions in the NBA. And then I think we would assume Gradey Dick is probably going to go. So that would mean those guys are all gone. And then we had the news yesterday that Cam Martin is transferring out of the program. That means there's a lot of players up in the air. I guess you could say Gradey Dick is sort of up in the air, but that feels like a very weighted balloon toward one side of it being he is gone. I would maybe put a 10% tag on him coming back, which honestly, that might be too high. So as far as the rest of the lineup that I haven't mentioned, I think literally everyone else is kind of in that bubble of you don't know what is going to happen. If you're having me guess, then I will say I'm kind of under the assumption I think Bobby and Joe come back. I think Joe has a chance for increased playing time and a bigger role as a bench player, or a chance to maybe compete for that second guard spot, which my preseason prediction had Elmarko Jackson starting at the second guard spot, but he's going to compete for it. And ideally, if Joe ever works out with his ability to create off the bounce and shoot off the bounce to where he was at the end of his career at Drake, that is a very useful player, similar to what KU was getting from Remy Martin, just a light version of it if he figures it out. But there is a big asterisk there. With Bobby, I know he really struggled this year in a lot of empty calorie games. Bill Self has talked about how good he thinks he's going to be in his KU career. So I think he's going to do everything in his power to try to keep him aboard, but I guess we'll wait and see. So I'm kind of under the assumption Bobby and Joe are back, but would it be surprising if one of them left because they see, hey, Dajuan Harris is back. That's a lot of point guard minutes gone. And we have Elmarko Jackson coming in. Chris Johnson's a combo guard. Like, maybe it's time for me to leave, but I kind of am under the assumption both come back. Kyle Cuff, that's another one where it wouldn't shock you if he transfers, because you see that you're behind all these guys in the rotation, but also maybe he views it as, well, maybe if I wouldn't have gotten injured, I would have been ahead of Bobby and Joe, because I could have played my way ahead of them because neither one really took down the minutes. But he certainly would be a top candidate to possibly transfer out of the program. And it's really just anybody wanting more playing time or could get pushed out, or they could just view it as, I want to come back and I want to compete. I want to, even though you're telling me that these guys are ahead of me, I'm going to prove you wrong. And then that makes it a little harder for that guy to transfer out. Zach Clements would make sense if he transfers because you're behind all these other centers. But again, you never underestimate how much these guys do want to be competitive and do want to compete and try to say, no, bleep you, like I'm going to surpass your expectations and also just like being here, right? That makes it a little bit harder to judge. I think the ultimate wild card in all this is MJ Rice. There was obviously the rumors when he came to KU that even after he committed, is he going to go to the G League Ignite? Is he going to play pro ball for a year in like Australia or something? And he ended up coming to KU, but it didn't work out. So now is he going to go in that route? Is he going to transfer and find a different school? Or is he going to just stick around and, there is an opportunity for a lot more wing minutes this year if Grady, Kevin, and Jalen are all gone. He is the ultimate wild card that I really have no idea what's going to happen. Then you have the 4 incoming players: Chris Johnson, Elmarko Jackson, Jamari McDowell, and the recent news, which was Marcus Adams a couple days ago, announced he is going to reclassify into the class of 2023. That is his original classification. It's not a case of a player who's going to come in at like, oh, he's 16 years old now. He graduates high school at the end of this year. He was just originally planning to go to a prep school for a year, so basically be 1 extra year and then come. But this is his original class, so he is reclassing into it. Really talented 4-man who could help you fill those minutes of Jalen Wilson. Obviously, if KJ moves to the 4, then you're behind him. But if not, right now, there's not a lot of other logical 4-men on the roster. I guess MJ Rice could play it, but he's also just 6'5". I do think Kansas is going to be bringing in a transfer pretty soon here who does play 4 minutes for you, or can. So that'll certainly be interesting to monitor. But those are your newcomers. And so if you view it this way, who is incoming? You have those 4 guys, and right now you have basically 4 players leaving: Kevin, Jalen, Grady, and Cam Martin. That means you're equaled out on scholarships. But right now you're operating with 13 scholarship players. Next year, you have to be at 12. I guess you don't have to. The rule is they have to lose 3 scholarships over the next 3 seasons, basically on what they imposed on themselves. So I guess they could, in 2 years, lose 2 scholarships and keep them all this year if they really wanted to. But I would just assume they're going to lose 1 scholarship this year, so that would put you down to 12. That would mean that somebody has to go on the roster, that you're 1 over on scholarships. And then if you're adding a transfer, which I expect them to do, and heck, I wouldn't even be surprised if they had 2 transfers, then all of a sudden you're looking at 2 or 3 more players leaving. So, between the 3 guards, Bobby, Joe, and Kyle Cuff, you expect one of those to leave. Maybe with one of the backup centers, like maybe a Zach Clements or something like that. Maybe he leaves, and maybe that's 2 open scholarships. And then the MJ Rice is the wild card one, or maybe another one of those guards, and that's how you would get to 3 in that situation. All right, let's talk more about the offseason ahead and big decisions that are looming, big storylines that we think are going to be coming up here in just a second. But first, this episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The tournament is heating up. Now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 rated sportsbook app, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. You heard me right, up to $1,000 in a no-sweat first bet. That's bonus bets back if your first bet does not win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and it is super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from money line to point scores and 3-pointers drained. You can get in on some of the March Madness action. Here's what I'm going with for my second chance bracket. Out of the West, I am going to go with the underdog, Florida Atlantic. That's not the West region. That is the East region. I'm going to go with Florida Atlantic. You can get them at plus 470 to win the East. In the Midwest, I am going to go, I'll go with the odds of Texas. Houston's minus 115. Texas is plus 190. So we'll go with the odds. In the South, I'm going to go with Creighton plus 175. And then in the West, I'm going to go with, UCLA and Gonzaga are even at plus 185. I've had UCLA all along because of, I think, their defense. And even without Jalen Clark, I think they can get it done. Bono's back, so that helps if you play UConn. I'll go UCLA plus 185. But you can pick your own futures at FanDuel. They even let you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with same-game parlays. Don't miss your chance to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Offseason ahead for KU. I think the number one storyline is not about player stuff. It is what's going on with Bill Self. I think the idea is that, KU kind of made it sound like he would have been back next week, but I'll be honest, I think with the procedure he had, I would just say sometimes the approach to the type of procedure he had and the recovery is more measured in weeks and months than it is days. And I know Bill Self was probably trying to be tough and get through everything, but I don't know. I don't know how realistic it would have been for him to even be back next week, to be completely honest. But there would have been, they kept it day to day, but I don't know. It was one of those things where he's dealing with a bunch of probably new medications that he wasn't on before, and he's dealing with that. And there's a lot of stuff going into it that he's going to have to kind of get used to, or he's going to have to recover from. So you are in the off season now. You would think these 6 months or whatever it is before the next season starts should be enough for him to get going. But he's 60 years old now. Jay Wright just retired at 60 years old. You have a health scare here. It could affect the way that you're coaching right now. Just makes you wonder if you would at all consider retirement. And I'm not trying to float anything out there that, I'm hearing or anything like that. It's just logic kind of connecting dots that, of course, you would probably have that conversation. Now, do I actually expect Bill Self to retire? No, I don't, because he's a very competitive person, and I don't think he wants to go out like that. I would imagine he wants a few more years, or he at least wants another ride at it, right? And I know for a fact, too, like Bill Self has been very much adamant that he wants to get through this NCAA IARP stuff, where he wants to get Kansas out on the other side in a good position, that when he does leave, he doesn't leave the program in a mess. And I know he cares about that. Now, obviously, if your health is preventing you from doing stuff, there's only so much you can do. But that'll be the big question. How much longer does Bill Self have? It seems like, a couple of years ago, he made the comment about, he thought originally when he got to around 60, he would be one of those coaches who'd want to retire. But now that he's closer to it, he sees himself coaching a lot longer. But then something like this pops up. You wonder where the mind is on stuff like that. And certainly his health and just getting back to health is going to be the utmost importance. So that'll certainly be the top storyline to monitor over the offseason. I guess the Gradey Dick decision is going to be that everyone's going to be kind of awaiting, but he's going to go to the combine. And the thing with these decisions is they take forever now to get through because of the combine, and then you're waiting until like May or June or whenever the deadline is for that stuff. But again, I wouldn't hold your breath too long on the Gradey Dick stuff. I guess keep in the back of your mind, like, well, certainly when he first came to KU, the idea with this is inside his family, this has been kind of discussed publicly, is that it was a 2-year plan. It was a 2-year plan for him at Kansas. So that was the plan originally, and he's made a ton of NIL money. I believe I don't know this for a fact, but I've heard some numbers around like, $1 million somewhere around there dollars that he's made. So it's not like he's, wanting for money necessarily. This is childhood team. That's why I put it at a 10% tag. I still have 90% that he goes pro, but with the way they finished the season, I guess you leave a slight possibility open, but again, don't hold your breath because that would be more of a shocking type of surprise type of thing than it would be it's a 50-50 call, something like that. I mentioned the NCAA IARP stuff. That's a huge offseason storyline as well. Is it finally going to hit this offseason? And what are the repercussions going to be for KU? Could there be a postseason ban where KU doesn't even get a chance to redeem themselves in the NCAA tournament next year? That'll certainly be interesting to watch. They had the self-imposed stuff that they took this past offseason that are going to lead into some of these future offseasons. Does that mitigate what they're going to receive in all this? And do we just finally have an answer above all else that KU can finally get out of this black cloud? I feel like we are going to hear about it this offseason. So the question is just kind of when and where. And then the last one, how aggressive is Bill Self in the transfer portal? Like I said, I believe KU is going to be having a transfer pickup that can play kind of on the wing coming at some point here soon. But how much further are they going to go? Right? Are they going to bring in one transfer? Are they going to bring in two transfers where they have or could they even go three? Could it be like, 2 years ago into the offseason that they won the title, they brought in 4 transfers. I'm trying to think. Remy Martin, Jalen Coleman-Lands, Joe Yesufu, and Cam Martin all came in. And some of those guys came off the bench, but it was basically, we're going to fill this with as much competition and veteran, whatever, as we possibly need to make this title winning team. Are they going to try to do that again? Are you going to try to get somebody to come off the bench and just give you bench scoring and be a bench 3-point shooter? Are you going to add a bunch of shooting via the transfer portal? Are you going to add someone who can create off the bounce and score off the bounce for you consistently? There's a lot of ways. Are you going to even look at the center position? As much as I think Ernest and Zuby are going to develop, or if KJ's at the 5, could you look to the transfer portal at the center position? Like there have been, I don't know, rumblings the past few years about some big name centers that maybe reached out to Kansas, or that Kansas reached out to, or something that there was interest in, but KU ended up not taking them for whatever reason. Could there be a big center that comes in? I don't know. How aggressive are they going to be in the transfer portal is certainly a huge storyline here for KU to monitor. All right, we're going to finish things up with how good I think this team is going to be in just a second with Locked On Jayhawks. So how good is this team going to be? If they can find shooting, I think they're going to be a really good team. But if they can't, this might be one of those years where they are like a 3 or a 4 seed of a Bill Self team. Because when you look at it, if the starting lineup, let's say KJ does move to the 4. If your starting lineup is Dajuan Harris, who can hit open threes, but he's not really creating threes and that sort of thing. KJ Adams at the 4, Ernest Duday at the 5. That puts a lot of pressure on your 2 and 3 men to be good 3-point shooters. And if, let's say, Elmarco Jackson, who's your top-rated high school recruit, comes in and he's a McDonald's All-American, he starts, he's a off guard next to Dajuan Harris, really good athlete, 6'3", should be a pretty good defender, should be good at driving to the lane, and should be able to create some of his own shots driving off the dribble. He can do a lot of those things, but he's not known for being like a refined 3-point shooter yet. And so when you're talking about a freshman who's more of a scorer than a shooter, like a lot of times those guys may be shooting the low 30%. Like, so now if you have basically 4 guys, none of them are really plus 3-point shooters, that 5th guy better be Gradey Dick or like Gradey Dick equivalent. And even if it is, that still might not be enough to be a great 3-point shooting team around them. So shooting is the big question for me here. But let's say you do, add a transfer and he can play the 4 and he's a high 30% 3-point shooter. And you have KJ at the 5 for a lot of minutes, and maybe every so often you play him at the 4, but for a good amount, he's playing the 5, or Ernest is playing the 5, and you have that guy at the 4 who can shoot. And then you add a 3-man who can shoot threes really well also. And you have a Jalen Coleman-Lands type coming off the bench who you can add another shooter off the bench in different situations. That's when I think they would be okay. And they could be a really special team, because the infrastructure for the defense should be a really good one. Dajuan Harris was your Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. KJ Adams can be a really good defender for you. Ernest Duday or Zuby Ejiofor could be a really good rim protector next year for you inside. So the infrastructure for the defense, Elmarco Jackson, really good athlete, good length on the perimeter and stuff, could be there for you to be a good defensive team. It's the shooting that has me concerned. And are you going to have enough guys? Because we saw it this year. They didn't have enough guys who could create off the dribble, who could create shots with the shot clock winding down. Gradey could hit a three. Gradey could pump fake and take a step in and hit a mid-range shot. Gradey could cut. But a lot of that wasn't, hey, Grady's going to dribble the ball and work here. Kevin McCullar every so often could do it, but it wasn't a consistent thing. He could have that little spin move in the lane. Jalen was kind of your one guy who could do that. And maybe Dajuan Harris grows that in his game. Maybe Marco Jackson has that next year. Maybe KJ Adams grows it in his game. Maybe you have more of a back to the basket game with like an Ernest Uday and Zuby Ejiofor with another offseason of work. That is an option you can go to in the half court. That essentially is the same thing of, hey, go create and go make a bucket, right? Like if they have that growth, that's a huge improvement as well. But that's going to be the biggest question that I think differentiates whether this team is a good team versus being an absolute great team. And how much do the freshmen impact things, right? That's always a big question as well. Like Marcus Adams, I think, is a very high ceiling prospect. If he comes in and he's one of the more underrated prospects in the country, and because he was playing against lesser high school competition and not on all these big AAU circuits, and he's been underrated, and all of a sudden they found something here that you didn't totally know about, and he's playing the four and throwing down nasty dunks and all this stuff, that changes things. Or if he comes in and it's MJ Rice where he's not playing maybe as much as you thought, then that changes things too, right? Like Chris Johnson, Marco Jackson, how much are you going to get from them? You don't totally know with a lot of these freshmen, and that's going to change the landscape a little bit here. But I think the avenue for them getting to a 1 seed again and for them being considered one of the true national title contenders, fine shooting, have more options next year of guys who can get you a bucket, possibly get a post option or have KJ develop that part of his game and have at least a few bench contributions as opposed to this year. It seems like a lot to ask to where maybe you don't expect it. And there is part of me that thinks maybe the year after, not next year, the year after could be the special year, because that could be another year with Dajuan Harris and KJ Adams of development. It could be junior seasons for guys like Ernest Uday and Zuby Ejiofor. It could be sophomore seasons for some of your young freshmen who are talented coming in this year, that could be the year. But again, with the transfer portal, because of that, it allows for some quick fixes that if KU hits the transfer portal hard and gets a couple big name transfers, then they could be right back up in that situation anyway and really develop into that type of team regardless, as long as Bill Self is back also. There's the big tag going back to our big offseason storyline. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. We'll be back tomorrow for another episode talking about kind of the legacy of Jalen Wilson. And you can also catch me on Rock Chalk Sports Talk 3 to 6 Monday through Friday. You can hit me up at D Johnson Radio on Twitter. Find us wherever you get any of your podcasts. Hit us up on YouTube as well. Later.